Good morning everyone, welcome back to Andy Odovok Dongle Madness, and I have with me here today this new flagship dongle from FiiO KA5. So let's check it out. As you can see here, this is the box itself, and inside the box you're gonna get the dongle itself, of course, together with this USB-C to USB-C cable. And good news for iPhone user, USB-C to Lightning cable. And here we have this simple adapter to adapt to USB-A. So let's just have a look at the build itself for this KA5. This is in fact a very well designed, very premium looking dongle. It is entirely constructed of aluminum for the chassis itself. And at the back here we have this Type-C female. On the other side we have this 4.4mm balance and also 3.5mm single-ended, which is pretty much a normal standard nowadays. And see here, we have this volume adjustment button, long button here. And we have an additional one more button here, which is a multi-function button, which I will show you later what it does. And last but not least, we have here LED display to show some information pertaining to playback and resolution itself. So let's just have a look at the configuration, the price for this KA5. This, as you can see here, KA5 is listed at in AliExpress right now, 120 US dollar, almost, at 119 US dollar. And in fact, looking at the configuration itself, this is directly from FiiO website. This is yet again another Cirrus Logic CS43198 DAC in dual configuration, as you can see here. And in fact, when we look at the power rating itself, the maximum power offered by this KA5 is in fact rated at 4 VRMS, and with the output itself being 265 milliwatt per channel. Fairly powerful, I would say. And when we look at this output power for the 2 VRMS, which is the single-ended 3.5mm, it is rated at 2 VRMS with 122, or in fact it is 136 milliwatt of power per channel. Again, quite powerful for a single-ended. And this is the most interesting part. Have a look at the signal to noise ratio here. This KA5 is capable of offering up to 130 dB of signal to noise ratio, and definitely that is a very impressive number. And at the lowest point, in fact, it is still fairly good at 128 dB of SNR. So what I'm trying to say is that even when connected to highly sensitive IEM, as low as 5.3 ohm, which I have tested, this KA5 is definitely very silent and very clean sounding with the background. Now, let's talk about the sound aspect. And before I do that, I'd like to clarify on two things. First, as usual with my audio gear reviews, you must remember that, the approach of my assessment and rating primarily based on subjective perspective from my standpoint as a listener, as a user of audio gear. I don't do measurement, I don't do graph or anything like that, but if there's a graph, I will share it with you and try to interpret my understanding of it. And secondly, no DAC or dongle can be judged on its own. It is always going to be judged based on what is connected to the dongle itself. So in order to do that, I would like to show you, these are the equipment which I have used to test this KA5. And as usual, I have with me here this ATOMOS ER2 XR single balance amateur, as you can see here. Okay. And I also have with me here this, my favorite of mine, Bequest Winter, which is a bone conduction and balance amateur or dynamic driver hybrid. Okay. And of course, I have my magnetic planar here, which is Tangzu Zetianwu Hede. I also have another multiple driver IM, one of my sensitive IM, which is C Audio Bravery AE here. Okay. And another hybrid, in fact, a 3-driver hybrid, which is a Kinera Idun Golden, very neutral sounding IM. And of course, a more traditional IM of Tanjim Zero, my favorite as well. And last but not least, I also have here the latest one from KZ, which is KZ DFI. And not limited to that, I also have my headphone here in order to test the dongle, which is Sennheiser HD 650 and also my Hi-Fi Man HE 400 SE. Alright. Now let's talk about some of the features offered by this KA5 and the best way to use it. As you can see here, this KA5 offered two different type of audio jack, 3.5mm single-ended and 4.4mm balance. And I am happy to say that comparing between these two, for up to 32 ohm of sensitivity or impedance rating, the quality is pretty much similar. Okay, the difference being the volume level, and in fact even the volume level, the gap is just at around 4 steps only. And as you can see here as well, this volume adjustment, they are in fact independent. Okay, so meaning to say that when I press this volume adjustment, it will not change the volume on the host itself. Okay, and then let's have a look at the best way to use this KA5. If you are on Android especially, just head over to Play Store and download FiiO Control app. And as you can see on screen right now, I am loading it up because I already have installed it, obviously. And here, I'm just gonna select FiiO KA5, right? And then FiiO will ask for control of this dongle itself. I click OK. And immediately on this screen, you're going to see a lot of feature, and perhaps this is one of the biggest appeal for this FiiO KA5. I will just simply openly say this. This is probably one of the most advanced, all right, configurable option offered to a user for any type of dongle, especially from the software side, because this KA5 in fact support digital out as well, SPDIF, if you attach to the 3.5mm. But I don't have any kind of use for digital out coming from the dongle, so I will not be talking about it. And of course, you have an option to change some of the setting here. In fact, the function button here, which I mentioned earlier, it can serve a multi-purpose of different thing, but by default, this acts as a pause button, which also work. As you can see, you are given two type of control mode. So just to make it simple, if you select the normal 60B, right, literally it means that offer you 60 step of volume. So when you press this, you're gonna have like, you know, an increment of between 1 to 60. But if you need a bit more of refinement, especially when driving highly sensitive IEM, I have found that using 120A works better, and it is in fact, you know, allowing me to do much refined volume adjustment. Okay, and then of course the good thing is that KA5 also offer high and low gain, and most of the time I always run on high. And this is very interesting also, DAC work mode. As you can see here, it is offered as class AB and even class H. To be frank with you, throughout my extensive testing of this KA5, I can barely hear any kind of difference between class AB and class H. Perhaps it's the limitation of my listening, but just to be on the safe side, I always place it on class AB. The most important part is in fact on the second screen. When you click on audio, right, you see there? Low pass filter. Okay, and this is where things gets really interesting. You are offered 5 type of different of sound filter, And by default, it actually comes here with this short delay, sharp roll-off filter. But as a rule of thumb, due to the various different listening devices which I have shown to you earlier, I actually prefer to use non-oversampling here. And the reason is that simple. I just prefer my DAC not to oversample anything. I want it to play in NOS mode, beat perfect. But in certain scenario, I might also choose to use slow roll off, especially if I am attaching some slightly brighter neutral sounding IM, which is already very analytical and could use a bit of kind of like, adjustment to the temperament of the sound itself. What it does is that it helps to improve, to prolong the decay stage at which it will be smoother. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that if you have something which is relatively warmer sounding, something like this HD650, it is perhaps better to use either non-oversampling or even the faster filter, the stock one. Okay, now let's talk about sound element of this KA5. In order to do that, let's just start here with the frequency response as provided by FiiO themselves. And as you can see there, see the graph here at 0, it's practically super flat. So what it means is that this KA5 is definitely a neutral, uncolored, unflavored, and transparent sounding dongle. And I can confirm that when I attach, the majority of my IEM and headphone which are neutral, what I'm hearing is that a sound which is faithful to the intended source with no adjustment to any of the frequency range. Meaning that, in a way, the sound signature of the attached device will be preserved. So if I am listening to something which is relatively bassy, like my Fostech T40 RP MK3, I will be hearing a bassy sounding output. But if I'm attaching it to something which is relatively like brighter and neutral, then the output will be brighter and neutral. No hint of adjustment to the sound signature itself. So that is definitely a good thing. And this KA5 definitely extend very well with the frequency range as well. With regard to, from lower frequency all the way to the upper frequency, I am hearing proper macro and micro details. The resolution is good. And in fact, I would regard this KA5 being highly analytical and technically competent as well. And talking about technical aspect itself, this is definitely very resolving. I was able to pick up, good amount of detail out of it. At the same time, most importantly as well, being analytical, it does not sacrifice on the element of music itself. So what I'm trying to say is that this KA5 is amply musical, yet natural and neutral at the same time. The balance is really good. And in fact, if I were to observe on certain element of the frequency range, for example, the mid-range itself, the upper mid-range, the best part is that I do not observe any kind of glare in the PINA region, which is a very positive thing. Even with very picky music, energetic music, this KA5 is in fact, a bit smoother than some other analytical dongle which I have used before. And on the subject of synergy itself, definitely no issue. It can practically handle any type of IEM I thrown at it, be it magnetic planar, single DD, hybrid, and at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, with a very clean background, no floor noise at all. And as you can see here, now let's talk about the driving power. This Sennheiser HD650 and Hi-Fi-Man HE400SE, and in fact, my Fostech here. Forgot about that. No issue driving at all, because when running on 4.4mm balance, push at high gain, I am hearing a wholesome and rich sounding output. But I must say that I do observe that when attached to this Sennheiser HD650 especially, the output itself kind of a bit soft sounding as compared to when tested with other dongles or even DAC amp, which I have here on in front of my PC here. So That is an indication that this KA5 is in fact already pushed to the max at the mark of 300 ohm. So keep that in mind. No issue with loudness, I can confirm with that. Attached to my PC using USB 3.0 and in fact, pushing the maximum volume in USB exclusive mode. I was in fact able to drive my HD 650 at around 30 out of 100 volume. So that is definitely very impressive. With everything that I have mentioned to you just now, let's find out the total score for this FiiO KA5. So as you can see on screen right now, KA5 score 85 out of 100 for the overall rating. And as you can see there, 1 until 10, 1 to 4, in fact, sound itself, which I already covered. And definitely 5, 6, 7, driving power, synergy factor, and volume management. Very impressive with driving power. In fact, because FiiO declare that this KA5 is rated up to 300 ohm. And I have tested it with 300 ohm. I must say that no issue at all with the loudness. Perhaps it's just a matter of the tuning aspect of it. But power-wise, definitely no issue. Synergy factor, it can synergize really well with any type of IEM, in fact. And in fact, the volume management itself is very impressive. Independent volume adjustment. So definitely it's almost perfect there. And then we look at features. This is without a doubt one of the best dongle when it comes to features. As I have shown you earlier, you can change many things, the configuration within this dongle itself. And in fact, on the fly itself, you can, do so much with this button as well. And then, of course, perhaps the only thing which is kind of a bit lacking is the last one there, power efficiency. Because when I tested this KA5 driving 32 ohm IEM attached to my Xiaomi phone here, which is 4000 mAh, at best, I was able to get at around 11 hours. So in fact, that is kind of like 1 to 2 hours shorter than the nearest competition. And just remember this, some other competition like Truth Ear Shio was able to score 23 hours. So that is like crazy. So if it's like 11 hours is pretty much okay, not terrible, but definitely I wish it could have been a bit more. Comparison. So how does this KA5 compares against the rest of the competition in Dongle Madness? Let's just have a look here first at this primary Dongle Madness site. You can see here, actually I have over 140 dongles tested so far. And definitely there's no way for me to compare this KA5 against all of them. So to make things simple, I'm just gonna narrow down to specific selection. As you can see here, I have identified a collection of Cirrus Logic CS43198 dongles. And in fact, as you can see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other different dongles, all built on the same deck. So let's just have a look at the first one. In fact, the earliest one that I can remember was Eco Zerda ITM03. So if we look at the rating for this ITM03, it is fairly average, pretty much the earliest implementation of this deck, and in fact, that also reflected on the sort of performance and sound quality offered by that dongle. It is, in fact, just to simply put, a very finicky dongle, I must say, especially with the dynamic presentation, especially when connected to portable devices. It's kind of a bit like unstable with the way it presents the sound itself. Sometimes it sounds good, sometimes it sounds like kind of a bit wonky. And in fact, everything else about the dongle is just pretty much average. So if I were to reflect and compare against this KA5, definitely this is far, far better dongle in every way possible. And then the next one, if I remember correctly, was Astel & Kern PEE51. And this is, in fact, until today, if I were to compare it against this KA5, PEE51 is definitely a bit more, in fact, a lot more energetic, a lot more colored, and vibrant. euphonic. In fact, it demands your attention, you know, especially with the type of tuning that it offers. It is just simply very colorful. It is in fact also kind of a bit average with the rest of the thing when it comes to like features, value proposition, and power efficiency. But I cannot deny that when it comes to sound itself, PEE51 is definitely a top performer as well. And then after that, in fact, we have something which is perhaps the pinnacle of CS43198, luxury and precision W2. As you can see there, right, luxury and precision W2 is in fact a very good performer when it comes to dynamic presentation and technicalities. And it is definitely, until today, still the best when it comes to that element of sound. The only thing that's it's lacking is perhaps on several other areas, as you can see there. And in fact, the total score for W2 is quite impressive at 82. And then we have the latest iteration of CS43198, which is Truth Ear FiiO. Now, if you look at the grading for this Truth Ear FiiO, in fact, it is pretty much very close, identical to KA5, 1-to-1, okay, when it comes to sound itself. Even driving power is similar to KA5. Synergy factor also similar. The only difference is that volume management is slightly less on FiiO. In fact, because by the time when I review it, it does not offer independent volume adjustment. And definitely KA5 offer a lot better volume management compared to Truth Ear FiiO. And if we look at another element which is quite impressive with FiiO was power efficiency. You see there, the difference between this KA5 and Truth Ear FiiO, 10 for FiiO, perfect 10, because of that 23 hours of endurance when connected to Android host, whereas KA5 only score 11 hours. But pretty much overall, I would say that KA5 is in fact a better performer in many ways due to the features offered by this dongle, the build quality itself, and in fact, when you look at, you know, several elements pertaining to, again, you know, value proposition for the price asked by this KA5, I would definitely say this is a better value proposition as compared to the rest of the dongle listed here. And the next one, let's just have a look at the comparison of the tuning itself, the sound characteristic for the CS43198 dongles. As you can see there, right, Eco's radar is the one which is less hi-fi sounding, a bit more analog, which is in fact something which I like, okay? And when you look at PEE51, it is definitely geared towards more on hi-fi sound, colored hi-fi sound, so it hovers closer to hi-fi sound. And the same can be said also for Moon River 2, again. And then of course, Luxury and Precision W2 being the most hi-fi sounding out of them all. But I would say that, you know, between FiiO and KA5, they are a bit better balanced because not so much focus on hi-fi, but a bit more of that balance edging towards organic and analog sound. Okay, now let's just wrap things up for this FiiO KA5. All in all, I would say that definitely, with everything considered with regard to the feature, the performance, and the value offered by this KA5, it is definitely a no-brainer, a very, very solid dongle. Let's just have a look at this, you know, feature itself on the hardware side. We have here 4.4mm balance and 3.5mm single-ended, which perform equally good up to 32 ohm. And definitely, if you are using mostly IEM, definitely you can just still use 3.5mm and don't have to worry about losing anything. But if you have something which is relatively harder to drive, like these headphones or even magnetic planar, okay, it is best to use the 4.4mm balance. And that is where you're going to get the maximum performance from this KA5. And then let's just have a look at this feature here, like this independent volume adjustment. It is just simply perfect. And then this extra button and the LED display here. It is definitely a very, very beautiful looking dongle with the feature and the build itself. And then Let's just have a look at the app itself, the feature from the app side. As I have shown you earlier, this is definitely without a doubt the most advanced and perhaps even the best when it comes to feature, user configurable feature. And if you are the type who like to tweak around with settings, this is definitely one that I would recommend. I hope that has been informational and useful to you. And I thank you for staying with me until the end of the video. Until next time, you have a good day.